Explaining the ECMA et al. No harm standard. The ECMA introduces an alternative to the best interest standard used in pediatric medicine. The ECMA explains that the clinical practice is generally guided by the principle of beneficence, that is, the moral obligation to contribute to the good of others. Legally speaking, children lack competence. They have a global inability to make decisions. In their stead, the parents and clinicians work together. For the pediatric patient, these two entities, the physician and the parent or guardian, have co-fiduciary duties. This co-fiduciary duties to work in harmony. The physician has the duty to act solely for the benefit of the patient. Clinicians make recommendations regarding diagnostic testing and treatment based upon what they believe will optimize the welfare of the patient. The parent also has this duty to act solely for the benefit to their child. Parents or guardian are generally authorized to make health care decisions on behalf of their children. The parents are representatives for the patient's preference, values, and commitment. Clinician must obtain consent from parents who are the patient's legally authorized decision maker. The parents do not have absolute authority. The law respects those decisions except when it places the child's life or well-being at risk. When the two entities agrees to the treatment or course of action, no problem. The goals of both parties are in consensus. No further action needed other than the course of action for the patient to take or the surrogates on their behalf. It is when there is a disagreement and when conflict occurs that a standard becomes crucial. A disagreement requires overriding someone's decision. This is when the best interest standard should be mediated with the no harm principle to justify an intervention of the parent's decision. Decisions are made with the best interest of the child in mind. The no harm standard focuses on the outcome of minimizing harm. A parent's decision should be overruled if it crosses the threshold level of harm. The ECMA uses the harm principle as a decision-making standard, but harm is said to be value-laden. Value-laden is when something is discussed, is done so with heavy subjectivity to a person's own values. These values can imply that whatever they value is a fact and not an opinion, and values are not inherently true. Values are based on emotion and not so much on impartial data. How do you pass the threshold level of something that is value-laden? This is the weakness in this standard. How do you have a consensus in a normative standard? The ECMA tries to answer this with a few guidelines. The first duty is to establish if the treatment is likely to benefit the child in an important way. The recommendation may be reasonable, but the physician assessment for what is best by itself does not justify overriding a parent's objection. Physician's authority to interfere with parents' decision-making is limited, except in an emergency. And as a last resort, only the state can order parents to comply with recommendations. Although the ECMA states that the harm principle is a threshold standard for state intervention, and this is emphasized that a consensus should be worked out, establishing a stronger team effort. The best interest acts as a maxim, whereas the harm principle acts as a utility. The best interest act asks, what would I do if it were me? It promotes well-being for another as one would do for oneself. We're not arguing the standard of care, and I think for standard of care, we can rely on the best interest standard. But for decision making, I do not think it goes far enough. It doesn't put enough burden on the outcome. Say you have two choices, you weigh the pros and the cons, and whichever has more pros, that one you would assume is the better choice. When making a decision, you do so by taking a risk-benefit assessment. Will the harm principle create a larger consensus? I think so. I think it is easier to define harm than it is to define what is best. What is best? What is the best way to prevent cancer? I can eat X fruit and vegetables. I can take X supplements. There's a plethora of things that I can do to prevent it, but there are things I should avoid, and that list may be a shorter one. I should avoid radiation. I should avoid processed food, etc. In the list of do's and don'ts, the don'ts are easier to come to an agreement to.